After the coronavirus hit the country, the government kind of stepped in to create this PPP protection loan. Now, this Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, was designed to give money to small businesses, or really, it was designed for just give money to companies, really to protect jobs and to help keep things from sinking too fast. So, definitely, comic companies took part in this. But there's an interesting kind of twist in how all this went down. It's going to be kind of maybe a more convoluted video. Let's see how we do. Hey, everybody, this is Perch. First off, I think this is going to be about defining terms, and then I'm going to try and leave you to your own conclusions about kind of what all this is. So there's a Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, that was put into place for the purposes of putting some money back into the system to protect from layoffs and to help keep the economy from tanking during the kind of unprecedented COVID disaster. So what kind of went on is that these loans went out, and then there was a couple different aspects to them. In some cases, the PPP could be forgivable, meaning the businesses would not have to pay back this loan. It wasn't a loan; it was a payment, if you will. But in order to have these loans be forgivable, meaning you don't have to pay them back, there were certain rules you had to apply to, and the rules are massive. There's a PDF, and there's a lot to go through, and these rules are not necessarily being enforced very well, just because there's so much going on. I suspect in the months and years to come, maybe more of these things are going to get revisited, and some people are going to have to, maybe pay back things that they didn't think they'd have to, and so there's a lot of chaos in here. Most in terms of projections, if you go to CNBC or some of these sites, then they talk about a couple things. That one, the Paycheck Protection Program is credited with bringing about 2.5 million Americans to work in May. Good news. But the bad news in the back of it is that about 14%, which is a very sizable number of business owners, they expect to lay off workers after the funds have been depleted and after the deadline. And I'm looking at the deadline is a little bit hard to exactly figure out, but it looks like basically somewhere in July is a deadline where you have to adhere to to basically this program. So I don't want to go too much into the video about PPP. We want to get to comic books in here, but why does this matter for comics? Well, two things. First off, I talked with Wes on his show about comic shops using the PPP funds, but I want to talk more about the comic publishers. So there are some pretty massive loans that went out with the comic publishers, and basically, if you went down the list, if you weren't DC or Image, nearly every other company, applied and received a loan. Top of the list being Diamond Comic Distributors that got somewhere as a range here of between 5 to 10 million from this payment protection loan. And again, the loans are designed to help with payroll to keep people employed. That's the biggest piece. And if the money, the loans are forgivable if 60% of the money goes to payroll, and if, and then a couple, like, again, many other terms under that. But Diamond Comic Distributors, 5 to 10 million. Dark Horse Media, 2 to 5. Newbury Comics, 2 to 5. Viz, 2 to 5 million. IDW, the San Diego Comic Convention, both got 1 to 2 million. Archie got between 350 to 1 million. So did Boom, Image, Oni, Skybound, Valiant. Again, Diamond Toys and Collectibles kind of came in for another 150 to 300,000. And then Humanoids, 150 to 300,000, Xenoscope, and then a handful of, other little shops and other things. But quite a bit of money was actually handed out to publishers. And here's the interesting trick. So again, maybe these publishers are planning to pay it back. We don't know whether they intend for these to be forgivable or not. Um, but and let me stop for a second, because some people are painting this like humiliation, like it's embarrassing for the companies to be taking this money. It's not. I mean, the whole purpose here was that it was supposed to help keep companies afloat, help keep things going, help keep people from being laid off. That companies wouldn't be forced that hard decision of having to lay off people that they don't want to lay off during this. Aid during unprecedented events like this is not embarrassing. It's not bad. And there's been, as is noted in a lot of articles, there's been plenty of fraud. And there's been some companies that have gotten these loans and then given them back when they shouldn't have, and so on, because they were really intended for smaller businesses, not giant corporations. And by the way, these loans here are independent of BINC, the Book Industry Charitable Foundation, that raised some money as well. And then there's a number of comic charities and everything else. But let's talk about PPP for a minute. And here's the catch. Per the terms of the PPP, you cannot, you basically cannot, you have to devote the money to payroll, and you can't lay people off during this period. You can't, take the money and then cut your staff. If you do, you're giving up on the forgivable part. But there's an interesting loophole for comic companies, and see if you've spotted it yet. Because if you remember, almost all the companies I mentioned there did do the pencils down, and they did cancel projects, and they did delay payments to contractors, and they did maybe cancel some projects that they were going to do. Technically, they found an interesting loophole, because the people whose projects they canceled, the pencils down, they're independent contractors, they're freelancers, they're not employees, they're not on the company's payroll, they're on the side. And this is one of the interesting things about the comic industry, is that because these groups are, these people are officially kind of not on staff, gives companies a lot of fluidity in terms of how they use the cash. Arguably, in many of the cases of publishers, the majority of people, quote unquote, who work for the company are not employees. They're on the outside. Because they're on the outside, they're not, they're not kind of tied to this. So it presents an interesting thing where a publisher can basically apply for a loan, kind of boost their numbers by their output and other things. They do have to report on kind of the employees that they have and other things in order to get the kind of the target for this number. But they can go ahead and potentially furlough or do quite a bit. So actually, let me separate it out. They can certainly cancel projects for independent contractors. They can not pay them. They can do a bunch of things there. No problem. Arguably they shouldn't, because those people are a key driver to those business. But that's where, as I've been talking about, tech companies and others have been sued in how they've used independent contractors and consultants as in critical roles, and then just kind of kept them there so they can avoid having to pay stock or give other company benefits. But the courts found that they were essential to the business, so they closed that loophole and didn't allow companies to continue to have that status. In the comic industry, those lawsuits haven't taken place, but it'd be hard to argue that the majority of the creative teams that actually make the comics, produce the product that the companies sell, are not essential employees. If they weren't doing their job, there wouldn't be a product to sell. It's pretty inherent to comics. So definitely, I think there's skirting a line there that one day the precedent in the courts will shut that down, or at least force them to do something different. But conceivably, with these PPP loans, publishers can basically get the money, use it to protect their staff, which is fine. That's what they're there for. But still cancel projects, still kind of collapse other things, and kind of going back to that CNBC article, still present the case where it's expected that once this period has ended, this grace period for the loan forgiveness, that they'll still go ahead and lay off staff. And probably they're going to need to do that because they're not producing as much product as they once were, because they've cut the payouts to the independent consultants. So it feels like there's a second bump that's going to have to occur here relatively soon for a lot of these publishers. Now, let me be clear, because some people are doing videos about this is the death of the industry and the world is coming apart and this is horrifying and everything else. Again, they're not looking at it correctly. This isn't the death of the industry, but it is definitely a sign of what's going to happen with some of these publishers. And the fact that there's this distinction, which a lot of people miss, between staff employees and independent contractors, and how companies kind of play both sides, that's going to come back to, I don't know if haunt the right word is, but it's definitely kind of dodgy in all this, especially as you think about these loans and how the money is being used. What you would hope is that these publishers that got a pretty big cash infusion are doing it to really kind of protect their core and investing that money wisely, and not, basically trying to survive for the long term, and aren't using it. Some of these companies had a lot of debts and other problems, and hopefully they're not using it to just buy down their immediate debts with no real plan for the future, because that's just delaying the pain for later. But the pain is going to come. So an interesting dynamic here. I'll keep an eye on this. It's curious how you see these loans. It's amazing to see. People like Diamond taking 5 to 10 million basically of these loans. It sets up an interesting picture. If you kind of look at this and you study it, there's a lot of things you draw out of it around of how all this goes. The other one, the San Diego Comic Convention, is fascinating. That it's 1 to 2 million that they borrowed basically, when the vast majority of the people that work there are definitely kind of on-demand employees or contractors. So it's curious where you see the money going. Anyway, what do you think of all this? Do you care? Please, in the comments below, please don't use this as another chance to kind of pick up the torch about the entire comic industry is dying tomorrow. That's not the case, and I mean, nobody's going to come back and point out to you 5 years from now that was wrong. But it's these things are always more detailed, always more nuanced than that, always. So just kind of consider that as you're looking at all this data. It's data for you to kind of assess what's going on. It's not data that leads to a stark conclusion. But anyway, like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter or Facebook at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.